Obviously, once the playoff seedings were revealed, there was a portion of Buckeye Nation that dreaded seeing, the ones and the fours line up as they did. Although we should just be happy and ecstatic to get into the thing. The possible dread of getting embarrassed. I know that fear's out there, of course, and then there are those who are just happy and optimistic and see it as an opportunity to get together what a lot of people thought were the two best teams in the country when the season started. And really, unfortunately, I guess the important part of all this is what the players and the coaches are capable of preparing themselves for. So the rest of it's just hype and discussion. But Tony, what are your thoughts on this? Your initial thoughts on the Georgia matchup?
We just did a podcast, Buckeye Weekly podcast, dropped it yesterday. We Tom Moore and I rewatched the Georgia-Oregon game. And you watch that game and you wonder, wow, how is anybody going to beat this Georgia team? Because they looked incredible and they're throwing the ball all over the place and they've got a bunch of different weapons, and defensively Oregon can do nothing against them. But I'm interested to see what they look like when we go and watch the Kentucky game or the Missouri game and, these closer games. I don't think we'll do Kent State, but watching that, it's clear that they have a lot of talent, and Ohio State's going to have some issues with the tight ends. But I'm always one who has said, if your best weapons on offense are your tight ends, then you're not all that unbeatable offensively. And so they have some issues at receiver, and I say issues that they manage to work it out how they do it. And Stetson Bennett is, I don't think he's a Heisman finalist. I mean, I know he is. I think it's pretty ridiculous that he is, but in that game against Oregon, he was incredible, and he's calm. He makes plays. He does, whatever is necessary. And he's a guy that, he's the meme with the dog X-ray. He's got that dog in him. And so he's impressive that way. Defensively, they've got just a bunch of guys that they throw at you. And so in terms of the matchup, Ohio State's offensive line is the interior of the offensive line, I think, is the biggest concern there. And can they run between the tackles? Because I don't know that they're going to be able to run wide stuff and outside stuff because Georgia can move. So I think if they can get push up front, then that would be a huge thing. And I guess maybe see some tempo, that sort of thing, to keep a Georgia defense locked on the field. If you got guys on the field that you want on there, and some of the guys that you don't want out there are on the sidelines resting, don't let them come back on the field. Just stick tempo and keep going. But I think it's obviously Ohio State's going to be the underdog, and they should be. And but throughout the season, I've said, and everybody else has said, there's no unbeatable team out there. Georgia has flaws. Ohio State has flaws. We'll just see whose flaws shine bigger that day.
Yeah, it's going to take Ohio State to come out and run a very solid game plan and execute. And that's two things there. And I have a pretty good feeling that they'll have a good game plan. The execution remains to be seen. Who's going to be able to go out there? What's going to happen at this point? I mean, you go through Georgia's schedule. It's not like they've, absolutely obliterated teams all the way, but, the 49-3 win over Oregon is very real. The 50-30 win over LSU, it was not a 20-point game. It felt more like a 40-point game, if we're being completely honest with ourselves. I'll kind of dismiss the 16-6 game against Kentucky. That was just the weird week where everybody had a hangover. Ohio State was playing in a windstorm in Evanston that week. But there are just games on there where I'm just not overly impressed with maybe the offensive side. The defense, I think the Georgia defense is every bit as advertised, and I think that's going to be the issue. These little screens not going to work. Ohio State's going to have a lot more vertical play. They're just going to have to be more decisive in what it is that they're going to do. Not to get ahead of myself, CJ Stroud, bring your running shoes, because you're either going to be running north-south or you're going to be running east-west, because Georgia's going to get after you. But Stetson Bennett, I mean, I'm sitting here and I'm looking at his stats right now. Went 3 straight games without a touchdown pass. Granted, it was Kent State, Missouri, and Auburn. he's a 68% passer, which is great, 20 touchdowns against 6 picks, but he's just maybe, game manager 2.0. Maybe he's just what a modern day game manager is supposed to be. I'm really shocked when I looked at Georgia's offensive numbers in terms of its national rankings. They're a lot better than I would have ever expected them to be, but there's just nothing in the Georgia offense that really jumps off the page. But maybe that's why they're so good, because everything fits so well together that even if something isn't working, everything else can carry them across the finish line. So a lot to unpack there.
I think their execution is really good. I think that they've got a handful of running backs who they rotate. They've got 3 or 4 guys who are between like 400 and 700 yards. So they kind of share the load with that, whereas Ohio State barely has anybody healthy to carry the football. So that's kind of a flip situation there. Throwing the football, I think I think last year you'd say he was the caretaker. This year he's become a little bit more of a playmaker. Bennett has, but again, their defense gave up 500 yards passing to LSU, including like 250 to the backup Nussmeier, who got in there after Jaden Daniels got hurt. So what does that mean? Does that mean, they're going to be susceptible to Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka in the passing game? They could be. Their outstanding corner, Keely Ringo, who was like one of the heroes in the championship last year. I think he had a big pick to seal that game. Talking to our Georgia publisher, he said Ringo's been picked on a little bit here down the stretch and has not played well. Their safeties are pretty good. As Kevin said, their front, even though they lost some guys off last year's team who were first-round NFL draft picks up front, they're still really good. So Ohio State's got its work cut out for them. And, this was kind of this is what makes me kind of worry about Ohio State. And, first, the defensive and offensive play calling I'd say the defensive play calling in the Michigan game was an F. I'd say the offensive play calling in the Michigan game was about a C. I think the execution and sharpness of the team was about a D. I think on defense, you have safeties staring into the backfield and getting beaten deep. You have safeties and corners panicking in coverage and fouling the receivers. You're whiffing on tackles. You're not getting off blocks. You're not pressuring the quarterback. Offense, you're dropping passes. You're missing blocks. You're having false start penalties at home. What do you think it's going to be like in a dome where it's like 150 decibels and everybody's rooting for Georgia? You think what's the over under on DeJuan there? 3, 4? I don't know. You tell me. So they have so many areas where they weren't sound, where they weren't good, and didn't look like the number 4 team in the country. They looked like the number 54 team in the country, to be quite honest with you, in that game. They look like an 8-4 team trying to play an undefeated team in that game, and that's how they played. They have got to play – they got to correct all of that. The coaches have to call a much better game, and they just have to hope that Georgia helps them, is kind of my feeling. I don't know. I kind of liken this to the Florida State Sugar Bowl with Andre Wadsworth. Like, they've got dudes who go out and do it, and Ohio State's got a pretty good team that was 10-2 that year, lost to Michigan and Penn State in the regular season, and got, by virtue of their Ohio State, got shoved into the Sugar Bowl and lost the game 31-14. This is what this kind of feels like. Maybe the LSU national championship game, one team's 2 touchdowns better before the game starts, and lo and behold, they ended up 2 touchdowns better. So Ohio State's got to play way over its head, in my opinion. They got to get their crap straight. I mean, that's all there is to it.